Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders. We speak to each one to one. Each day, we read gloomy reports on the state of our economy. The state and city's coffers are, if not exactly empty, facing shortfalls in the billions of dollars. Push has come to shove, with legislators trying to protect their constituents, labor leaders trying to protect their members, and lobbyists, well, lobbying. Is the fiscal situation intractable? Joining me to help sort out the reality and the possibilities for change is Carol Kellermann, president of the Citizens Budget Commission, the nonprofit institution that was founded in 1932, which was also a time of crisis. Welcome.
Thank you.
Carol, for those of us who work here at CUNY, we're already familiar with cutbacks, the tuition increases that have resulted from the state and city's financial troubles. Is there an end in sight?
Probably not in the short run, no. CUNY and SUNY have both suffered cuts, and since they rely on state assistance, and since CUNY community colleges are paid for primarily out of the city budget, they will probably have additional burdens to bear in the coming budget years.
Now, you've been a consultant here at CUNY. Can you tell me something about your work for the university and the results?
Yes, I came to help start a new program, ASAP, the Accelerated Study and Associate Programs, which is a special project funded by the mayor's office to try to increase the graduation rate of students in community colleges. As you probably know, the graduation rate at community colleges is very low. It's something like, 20% graduating in 6 years, because community college students have a lot of other responsibilities and they're not usually full-time. And so the goal of this project was to try to at least double the 2- and 3-year graduation rate by giving students extra supports, making the class schedule more convenient for students who work, giving them free Metro cards so that they had additional help in transportation. And I came to just help get the program off the ground because the mayor's office gave it funding in January, and the goal was to have 1,000 students in the program by September. Mm-hmm. And the program has done extremely well. Now,
that was started when? When it was just
2007.
Okay.
And the first group of students, almost 60% graduated in 3 years.
Really?
Yeah, it's great.
Wow.
I went to the first graduation. It was really great. And I think it's really the basis on which Chancellor Goldstein is proposing to open a new community college to try to use all of the learning from ASAP and the components of ASAP on a larger scale.
I guess because in the past, a community college was some place where people could go and just sort of hang out for a long time and sort of dither if they wanted to and take some courses. It would not necessarily be focused.
Well, that's okay. I mean, it's an okay place for people to do that, to learn specific skills or to try things out. But really, the vast majority of students who enroll in community college want to graduate. They think they're going to graduate. They don't realize how difficult it's going to be. They end up not being able to take a full course load. And the problem is that then they get discouraged and they drop out.
Right.
And we all know that the more college you have, the higher your long-term earnings capacity is. And so getting that associate's degree and using it to transfer to a 4-year college, which is another thing that community college students aspire to do, is very important. And this is something that's being looked at across the country now. Even President Obama has made graduation from community college one of his agenda items. And the chancellor was, he was very forward-thinking in saying, why don't we work on this and let's look at what works around the country and bring it all to bear in this program. So it was really fun for me, and it was very satisfying to see how well it's done.
Now, you're obviously no stranger to politics. You worked among other places as chief of staff for Chuck Schumer when he was a congressman. You were deputy commissioner of the New York City Department of Finance. And you worked for a number of nonprofits that were vying for city and state dollars. Have you ever seen such a need for funds and so little money to go around?
No, it's really, you always think things are difficult, particularly when you're in the nonprofit world, because you're always looking for money. But this is really, this is really probably the most serious thing I've seen in my professional career.
Tell us about the Citizens Budget Commission. Who founded it and why and what you do?
It was founded, as you said in your introduction, in 1932 during the Depression, when there were threats of very serious budget cuts in New York City and fear of higher taxes at a time when people were really struggling and there was a tremendous amount of unemployment. And so some of the prominent community leaders of the time, the Harrimans, the Astors, banded together to form this group to be a watchdog on city finances. And the idea was that taxpayers were going to form a commission and they were going to watch over what city government was doing in terms of finances. And over time it grew. And in 1984, the mandate was expanded to include looking at state finances as well, because I think the members of the commission realized how intertwined city and state finances are and how much the city depends on the state. You couldn't really separate them.
And so how do you do this? Is it primarily by doing reports or studies?
Yes, it's primarily a research activity. We do reports. We take positions based on what the research tells us, but we try to be completely nonpartisan and fact-based. We do research, we look at what the data says, and we try to call it like we see it, which sometimes means that we're saying things that are unpopular. Some would have said in the past impractical, although now many of the things that the CBC has been talking about for decades seem to be kind of conventional wisdom. The commission is the trustees of the organization. We have anywhere between 120 or 150 at any given time, and they're concerned citizens, and committees of trustees oversee and review all of the research. So they're people from all aspects of the New York economy, and they oversee what the staff does, and they ask questions and probe and hold us accountable, and I think make the work much more thorough and kind of grounded in the practical realities that people who are in the working world bring to bear on what we're doing.
And the money comes from where? Where does the funding come from?
It comes from the trustees.
Okay.
The trustees contribute. We have an annual dinner, and people buy tables to the dinner, and that's it. We do not have any government funding, which means that we are very small, lean and mean, but it also gives us independence.
The city is predicting a $4.5 billion budget gap in, I think, 2012. The state, a $9 billion budget gap in 2011. Who's hurting the most?
Well, the gap is from a couple of things. One is the recession, and that revenue is down because people aren't able to pay the taxes that they were paying in the past. But it's also from something that the CBC has been talking about, as I said, for decades, which is the state and the city have been, just as a way of life, spending more than the revenue that they were getting and putting things off, borrowing money, finding surpluses at the end of the year and using them to pay the following year's expenses. And sooner or later, you just run out of reserves and kind of short-term gimmicks and what we call one-shots in order to keep going, even though the revenue is not coming in. So everyone is hurting. The question is, now that we've run out of gimmicks, how are we going to align our spending with the actual revenue that we have? And that is going to mean cutting services and cutting some of these budgets.
Everybody, including your commission, has called for reforms in the state employee pension system. I pulled up some figures that the average pension of a recent state employee is about $33,000. The average pension of police and firefighters, $61,000. These retirees also get health insurance for themselves and their families at little or maybe no cost. Uniform workers can retire after 20 years with full pensions, with no age requirement for the pension, and their pensions are based on earnings that include overtime, which they tend to pad heavily in the last year. What's wrong with this picture?
Well, what's wrong with the picture is that we made promises that we aren't really financially able to keep. A lot of the structure of the pension system comes from another era when the bargain was public employees will earn less than they could in the private sector. In exchange, they'll be guaranteed lifetime security. Well, things have changed. First of all, the salaries are not necessarily less than you would earn in the private sector. It depends on what type of employment. Second of all, when you talk about uniformed employees, there really is no analogous private sector wage. And people are living longer. And that's a good thing. But when you can retire after 20 years at 3/4 of what you earned at the end of your career, for in particular firemen and policemen, many of whom get disability pensions, and then you can go and have a whole nother career, we're still paying for 20 years more than when these things were originally constructed.
So what kind of reforms do we need in the pension system?
Well, first of all, yes, we need to ask public employees to pay more towards their health insurance. As you said, at the city level in New York City, it's free completely forever.
While they're working and always.
And your spouse.
Okay.
And when you go on Medicare because you're 65 and theoretically then you're covered by the federal government, the city reimburses your premiums that you pay to Medicare. So we need to ask for contributions from employees, and that will help offset a lot of the cost. State employees do pay. They pay 10% for a single person and 25% for a family, and perhaps those have to go up. So we need to just get people more contributions. They need to pay into their pension system more than they do. In New York City and state, the employer pays 8 or 9 times more than the employee does.
Wow.
Whereas in the private sector, most people are not in this type of pension system. They're in a retirement 401k where there's some sort of fixed compensation put in by the employer. In New York City and state, we pay in whatever will guarantee that you will get that payment for the rest of your life, and it's just very high. And it's not that public employees aren't important, and it's not that we don't value the work that they've done, but we have to reconfigure these things to deal with
more
the
in
reality.
line with other people.
With other people, with the longer lifespan, and with the fact that people going into jobs that these days don't really expect to be there for the rest of their life. People move around a lot more, and it would be better for people to have something that was portable.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break, then we'll be back with more with Carol Kellermann, President of the Citizens Budget Commission, after the following message.
Secondhand smoke kids breathe in smoke that can have as much nicotine and carbon monoxide as what's inhaled by a smoker. About half of secondhand smoke kids have cancer-causing chemicals in their bodies. They suffer more frequent and severe asthma attacks. And some studies even show a link to learning problems. Don't raise a secondhand smoke kid. Quit smoking today. For help, call 311.
Los niños fumadores pasivos respiran humo que puede contener tanta nicotina y monóxido de carbono como lo que es inhalado por un fumador. No críe un niño fumador pasivo. Deje de fumar hoy. Para obtener ayuda, llame al 311.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Carol Kellermann, President of the Citizens Budget Commission. Another area for closing the state budget gap that people are always talking about, reducing Medicaid costs. How do you do that?
It's very difficult. We have the most expensive Medicaid program in the United States. Per capita, we spend twice as much as everyone else in the country, but we're not healthier or getting better medical care. So there clearly is a lot of room. Most of the money in Medicaid goes to only 25% of the people in the program. It's not the large majority of people in Medicaid families with kids. It's very ill, frail people who are at the end of life or disabled people. And it's long-term care, nursing home costs and home health care and community residences for people with handicaps and mental disabilities are very, very expensive. And those are the areas that are the most rapidly growing. We spend double what everyone else in the country does for these things. And
New York does.
Yes. So those are the areas where we have to look. And they're difficult to talk about. It's not that we want to deny people care. We have a very generous program in New York. We have very high income limits, and we provide a lot of services. So we're going to have to look at the cost per service. We're going to have to look at managing the services better so that someone is looking at the whole array of services that a very ill person is getting and making sure that they're coordinated and that they're not having fragmented services. They're taking their medication. The services are being provided in the most thoughtful but also cost-effective way. And we don't really do that now. Everything is in a silo. You go to one doctor, you go to another doctor, you may have medications that conflict with each other. Nursing home rates are very high, and they're not based on the patient. They're based on the facility. And you could have two facilities across the street from each other that have completely different reimbursement rates because of the size of the building, the history, how long they've been in business. We have to make all of these things more rational and look at the way other states are doing them that are more cost effective.
To what extent does fraud play a part in Medicaid costs?
Well, look, it's a very big program. It's a $52 billion a year program, and it's hard to manage, and of course there's fraud. But we're not going to lower the costs in any significant way by talking about fraud.
It's management.
It's management, yes.
How do you feel about Governor Cuomo's proposals, in his recent State of the State address for reducing the state deficit?
Well, in terms of Medicaid in particular, he's doing something unusual, and I hope it works, which is to say, I'm not going to impose any sort of cuts. You people who work in this field know the program best and will know how to manage it better. So I'm putting all of you in a room, all the so-called stakeholders, the employee unions, the healthcare providers. I'm going to give you a target amount. You figure out how to do it. And if you don't, I will impose a cut. He's bringing in the man who did this in Wisconsin, and we all hope that it works. It sounds like a good idea, but the cuts that this group comes up with, first of all, they have a very short window. They're supposed to come up with their recommendations by March 1st. They're just getting started now. They're under a lot of pressure. And the cuts that they propose have to be recurring. If they just come up with short-term things or say things like, oh, there's a lot more fraud and we'll eliminate it, that's not going to help us in the second, third, and fourth year. But we have to try to give this plan some time to work.
He's talked about no tax increases. Does that make sense?
It certainly makes sense theoretically. We're in a down economy. We don't want to put taxes on people. We want people to spend their money. We want people to invest. We want businesses to hire people. We don't want them to feel more taxed. I think the same feeling that people have about state taxes is what caused the Bush tax cuts to be left in place for everybody. And I think that certainly the business community is encouraged by the governor saying that. Whether he'll really be able to stick to it when there are pressures and when the cutting is so hard is a question.
He's talked about a cap on state spending. I have no idea how that would work or if it would work.
He has proposed that you basically say spending can't go up by more than a certain percentage each year, tied either to the cost of living or the growth of personal income in the state or some sort of formula using both. Many states have done this. You would wish that we wouldn't have to do that. You would wish that the elected officials who we vest with the responsibility of spending our money would impose discipline on themselves, but it does seem to be very hard to do. And so I think the idea is there will be a cap, and we will all have to work together to stay below that cap. The problem that's happened in other states is that there start to be exceptions to the cap or workarounds, and you start finding backdoor ways to fund things, and then you're not really capping spending, you're just having less transparent ways to do it.
Mayor Bloomberg has called for changes recently in the civil service system to reduce the state's control over city hiring, to reduce reliance on civil service exams, to reduce the role of seniority in firing people. What do you think of his proposal?
Well, I haven't read the whole report. We were briefed on it before he issued the report, and it all seemed very sensible. You know, the Civil Service Commission is backed up. They have the entire state to deal with. There are requests from New York City for rulings that have been pending for a year or 18 months. So it seems like a good idea to let the city do some of these things themselves. It's a very large system that's bigger than many of the other localities put together. And a lot of the titles were created a long time ago, you know, before we had such sophisticated information technology. Some of those titles could probably be combined, and we wouldn't have to have so many exams. He wasn't really proposing a dismantling of the concept of civil service, but more of a consolidating and streamlining, which makes sense.
The budget dance in the city council, among the mayor of the city council, usually involves cutting the budget for key services and then restoring part of that money. Is that sort of an unspoken agreement between the city council and the mayor, and is that a good way to do things or not?
It does seem that there is a dance that is orchestrated and that everybody understands. But I think it's important to point out that it doesn't involve very much money. The budget of New York City is $62 or $63 billion a year, and the discretionary amount that the City Council is looking at is usually under $100 million. Just now they restored $30 million of over $250 million in cuts that the mayor proposed. So it's not a lot of money. It makes the city council members feel like they've had an impact, but others would argue that they are completely preoccupied with these small services and that they're basically ceding responsibility and decision-making for the vast majority of the budget to the mayor.
How significant a part will the city and state employee unions have to play in closing the respective deficits?
Very important, very, very important. We've talked about pension reform or getting health care contributions. All of the contracts at the city level are expiring in the middle of this year. You know, the mayor has put nothing in for salary increases, and so these budget deficits are already high. They would be even higher if the unions demand salary increases. So we really are going to be depending on the unions to work together with the executive and legislative branches to be realistic and to participate in the sacrifice that other New Yorkers are having to experience.
And it's certainly in their interest to do that because, I mean, if you look at, you know, collaborate with us in making reasonable cuts, or you might just lose jobs.
Well,
right?
That's the question. What will the unions think is more important? Jobs and services to their members, who are taxpayers, or protecting the amount of money and the benefit structure for existing members? And would they rather have a smaller membership with the benefits that they have now, or a larger membership that we're not talking about current members, we're talking about only future members
right.
giving up benefits. You know, that's a judgment that the union management is going to have to make.
I read an article recently, I believe said that the Mayor Bloomberg is seeing his lowest approval ratings ever. Is that just the curse of the third-term mayor, or how do you think he's doing?
I think that the third term is a challenging assignment, which he wanted. But we generally get impatient and disgruntled by a third term. He has very serious challenges. He knew about the challenges and felt that he was the best suited person to take them on,
right.
and he does take them on. I mean, he cut the budget this year to have savings for next year. But it's going to be very difficult, and people will be unhappy with him because he's going to be the bearer of bad news.
Okay. And we're going to see how bad it gets, city and state. I want to thank Carol Kellermann, President of the Citizens Budget Commission, for joining me today. For more information about the Citizens Budget Commission, you can go to their website, cbcny.org. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.